The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace, as Queen Cordelia adjusted her reading glasses and reviewed the document before her. At 68, she had spent nearly 2 decades as the kingdom's queen consort, and the weight of tradition rested heavily on her shoulders. The ornate office, with its towering bookshelves and portraits of former monarchs, had become her sanctuary, where she pondered the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing change. The issue at hand was more complex than many realized. The royal jewelry collection, accumulated over centuries, contained some of the world's most precious tiaras and crowns. Each piece carried not just monetary value but deep historical significance. The Starlight Tiara, crafted in 1847, had been worn by 5 queens before her. The diamond rose circlet had adorned royal brides for over a century. These weren't merely accessories, they were symbols of continuity, power, and the very essence of the monarchy itself. Recent events had troubled Queen Cordelia deeply. At the last state banquet, she had noticed Princess Catherine arrive wearing the moonbeam tiara without proper consultation. The piece, while beautiful, had traditionally been reserved for specific ceremonial occasions. Similarly, Duchess Sophie had been photographed at a charity gala wearing the pearl cascade tiara, which belonged to a different category of royal jewels altogether. These incidents, while seemingly minor to outsiders, represented a growing concern about the preservation of royal protocol. The queen consort understood that the younger generation of royals faced pressures unknown to previous generations. Social media scrutinized their every appearance, fashion magazines dissected their choices, and the public had developed an insatiable appetite for royal glamour. Princess Catherine, married to the heir apparent for 8 years, had become a global fashion icon whose jewelry choices influenced trends worldwide. Duchess Sophie, though newer to the family, had quickly established herself as a graceful representative of the crown at various charitable functions. However, Queen Cordelia believed that with great privilege came great responsibility. The tiaras weren't simply beautiful objects to be worn at will. They were cultural artifacts that needed careful stewardship. Each piece had its proper place in the hierarchy of royal occasions. State dinners required different jewels than garden parties. Formal portraits demanded consideration of historical precedent. The casual mixing of these traditions, while perhaps innocent in intent, threatened to dilute the very meaning behind centuries of careful protocol. The palace staff had begun to notice the confusion as well. Lady Margaret Thornfield, the longtime keeper of the royal jewels, had approached Queen Cordelia with concerns about the increasing frequency of jewelry requests. Young royals were asking for pieces without understanding their historical context or appropriate usage. The storage and security systems, designed around predictable patterns of use, were being strained by spontaneous requests and last-minute changes. Queen Cordelia spent hours in contemplation, walking through the portrait gallery where paintings of her predecessors seemed to watch her every move. She studied the faces of queens who had navigated their own challenges, from wars to social revolutions, always maintaining the dignity of the crown. Their jewelry choices, captured forever in oil paintings, told stories of careful consideration and respect for tradition. The decision to establish new guidelines hadn't come easily. Queen Cordelia genuinely cared for both Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophie, viewing them as daughters rather than merely royal obligations. She had witnessed Catherine's transformation from a nervous newlywed to a confident mother and royal ambassador. She had seen Sophia's dedication to her charitable causes and her genuine desire to serve the kingdom well. The last thing she wanted was to stifle their natural grace and style. Yet the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to maintain certain standards while adapting to modern realities. Queen Cordelia had observed how other royal families worldwide had struggled with similar issues. Some had become too rigid, alienating younger generations and appearing out of touch. Others had become too casual, losing the mystique and respect that gave monarchy its power. The challenge was finding the middle ground that honored tradition while allowing for personal expression. The preliminary discussions with her advisors had been extensive. The Palace Protocol Office had compiled detailed histories of each major tiara, documenting their previous usage and the occasions deemed appropriate for each. The security team had raised concerns about the insurance implications of more frequent jewelry movement. The Public Relations Department had noted the increasing media attention on royal jewelry choices and the need for consistent messaging about the crown's values. Queen Cordelia also considered the international implications of her decision. Foreign dignitaries and royal families watched the kingdom's protocols carefully, often using them as models for their own traditions. Any changes would be scrutinized not just domestically but globally, potentially influencing royal customs in other nations. The weight of this responsibility was not lost on her as she contemplated the far-reaching effects of seemingly simple jewelry rules. The personal relationships involved made the situation even more delicate. Princess Catherine had always shown respect for Queen Cordelia's position, often seeking her advice on various matters. Their bond had grown stronger over the years, particularly after Catherine became a mother and began to understand the complexities of balancing personal desires with public duties. Duchess Sophia, though more recent to the family, had demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for learning royal protocols and had never intentionally caused offense. As Queen Cordelia prepared to draft the new guidelines, she reflected on the broader purpose they would serve. These weren't arbitrary restrictions, but rather a framework for preserving the cultural heritage embedded in the royal jewelry collection. Each tiara represented craftsmanship, history, and the stories of the women who had worn them before. By establishing clear protocols, she aimed to ensure that future generations would inherit not just beautiful objects, but a living connection to their ancestors. The challenge lay in communicating these intentions clearly while maintaining the warm family relationships she had cultivated. Queen Cordelia knew that the success of her new guidelines would depend not just on their content, but on how they were presented and implemented. The conversation would require diplomacy, patience, and a clear explanation of the historical and cultural significance behind what might initially appear to be simply matters of fashion and etiquette. The ornate sitting room adjacent to Queen Cordelia's private chambers had been carefully prepared for what palace staff privately called the tiara discussion. Fresh flowers from the royal gardens adorned the mahogany side tables, and afternoon tea had been arranged with the finest china, a subtle reminder of the ceremonial importance that surrounded even the simplest royal gatherings. The queen consort had chosen this informal setting deliberately, hoping to soften what she knew would be a delicate conversation with Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophia. Princess Catherine arrived first, her elegant navy dress complemented by a simple strand of pearls that had belonged to her late mother-in-law. At 31, she had grown into her role with remarkable grace, though Queen Cordelia could still detect traces of the uncertainty that had marked her early years as a royal. The princess took her usual seat by the window, where the afternoon light caught the subtle highlights in her carefully styled hair. She sensed that this gathering held more significance than the typical family chat, though she maintained her characteristic composure. Duchess Sophia entered moments later, apologizing softly for her slight delay. At 28, she brought a different energy to royal functions, more spontaneous perhaps, but equally committed to her duties. Her choice of a cream-colored ensemble with delicate gold jewelry demonstrated her developing understanding of royal fashion protocols, though Queen Cordelia noted that learning such nuances took time and careful guidance. The Duchess had always shown eagerness to learn, asking thoughtful questions about traditions and their meanings. After the customary pleasantries about family matters and upcoming engagements, Queen Cordelia gently steered the conversation toward its intended purpose. She began by acknowledging the magnificent work both women had done in their royal roles, praising Catherine's successful children's literacy campaign and Sophia's innovative approaches to mental health advocacy. These weren't empty compliments, but genuine recognition of their contributions to the monarchy's modern relevance. The transition to the jewelry discussion required careful navigation. Queen Cordelia explained that she had been reviewing various aspects of royal protocol, not out of criticism, but from a desire to preserve the historical significance of their customs for future generations. She spoke about the jewelry collection as a living museum, where each piece carried the stories and traditions of previous generations. The tiaras weren't simply beautiful accessories, but cultural artifacts that connected the present monarchy to its rich heritage. Princess Catherine listened intently, her diplomatic training evident in her thoughtful responses. She had always understood the weight of tradition, having experienced firsthand how her every public appearance was analyzed and interpreted by media and public alike. When Queen Cordelia mentioned specific instances of jewelry choices that had raised protocol questions, Catherine accepted the feedback gracefully, acknowledging that she sometimes made selections based on aesthetic preferences without fully considering their historical context. The conversation revealed interesting perspectives from both younger royals. Princess Catherine shared her challenges in navigating the vast jewelry collection, explaining that she often felt overwhelmed by the choices available and uncertain about which pieces were appropriate for specific occasions. She had developed a deep appreciation for the craftsmanship and beauty of the tiaras, but admitted that understanding their proper usage required more guidance than she had initially realized. Duchess Sophia offered her own insights, describing her experience as someone relatively new to royal protocols. She explained how the magnificent jewelry collection had initially seemed like a wonderful privilege, but she had gradually come to understand that each piece carried responsibilities along with its beauty. Her background hadn't prepared her for the complex etiquette surrounding royal jewels, and she welcomed clearer guidelines that would help her make appropriate choices. Queen Cordelia found their openness encouraging, and used it as an opportunity to share stories about the individual tiaras. She spoke about the Diamond Rose Circlet, commissioned to celebrate a royal wedding in 1892, and how its subsequent wearers had each added to its legacy. The Starlight Tiara had been worn during crucial state visits that had shaped diplomatic relationships. Even seemingly simpler pieces had their own significance, tied to specific ceremonies or family milestones that gave them meaning beyond their monetary value. The discussion of practical implementation proved more complex than the philosophical foundations. Queen Cordelia proposed a system where major jewelry selections would be coordinated through Lady Margaret Thornfield, the keeper of the royal jewels, who possessed encyclopedic knowledge of each piece's history and appropriate usage. This wouldn't mean seeking permission for every jewelry choice, but rather ensuring that significant tiara selections aligned with protocol and occasion requirements. Princess Catherine raised thoughtful questions about how this system would work with their increasingly busy schedules, and sometimes last-minute changes to royal engagements. She had experienced situations where events were added or modified with little notice, requiring quick decisions about appropriate attire and accessories. Queen Cordelia acknowledged these practical concerns and suggested developing a streamlined process that would provide guidance without creating bureaucratic obstacles. The conversation also touched on the broader implications of royal jewelry choices in the modern media landscape. Duchess Sophia mentioned how photographers and fashion commentators analyzed every detail of their appearances, often without understanding the historical significance behind their selections. Queen Cordelia agreed that this external pressure sometimes pushed younger royals toward choices that prioritized visual impact over traditional appropriateness. Throughout the discussion, Queen Cordelia was careful to emphasize that these new guidelines weren't meant to restrict their personal style or limit their options. Instead, she positioned them as tools for better understanding and utilizing the incredible resources at their disposal. The royal jewelry collection was one of the world's finest, and proper stewardship would ensure its preservation and continued relevance for future generations. Both Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophia expressed appreciation for Queen Cordelia's approach to the conversation. They had expected criticism or rigid rules, but instead found thoughtful guidance and historical context that helped them better understand their roles as temporary custodians of these treasures. The discussion had transformed what could have been a confrontational meeting into an educational opportunity that strengthened their relationships while addressing important protocol concerns. As the afternoon progressed, the three women began outlining practical steps for implementing the new guidelines. They discussed creating reference materials that would help with jewelry selection, establishing regular consultations with Lady Margaret Thornfield, and developing emergency protocols for last-minute event changes. The collaborative approach ensured that all perspectives were considered and that the final guidelines would be both historically appropriate and practically feasible. The meeting concluded with Queen Cordelia expressing confidence in both women's commitment to upholding royal traditions while continuing their excellent work in their respective charitable endeavors. She emphasized that these changes weren't about limiting their effectiveness, but rather about ensuring that their public appearances reflected the dignity and continuity that the monarchy represented. The new guidelines would be tools for success rather than obstacles to overcome. The news of Queen Cordelia's tiara guidelines spread through the palace corridors with the swift efficiency that characterized all royal communications. Within hours of the meeting, various palace departments were buzzing with discussions about the implications and implementation of the new protocols. The announcement had been carefully crafted to emphasize tradition and preservation rather than restriction, but different segments of the royal household interpreted the news through their own perspectives and concerns. Lady Margaret Thornfield, the veteran keeper of the royal jewels, received the news with a mixture of relief and apprehension. For over 2 decades, she had safeguarded the collection, maintaining detailed records of each piece's condition, history, and usage patterns. The recent increase in spontaneous jewelry requests had stretched her small team's resources and created logistical challenges she hadn't anticipated when she first accepted the position. The new guidelines promised to restore some predictability to her work while ensuring that the historical significance of each piece was properly respected. In the palace's public relations department, communications director Sir James Ashworth viewed the situation with the strategic mindset that had served the monarchy well during various crises and celebrations. He understood that any changes to royal protocols would inevitably attract media attention, and he had already begun crafting messaging that would frame the new guidelines positively. The challenge lay in presenting the changes as natural evolution rather than correction, emphasizing continuity and respect for tradition while avoiding any suggestion of conflict within the royal family. The domestic staff, who handled the practical aspects of royal dressing and event preparation, had their own concerns about how the new protocols would affect their daily routines. Personal assistants and dressers had developed efficient systems for coordinating royal appearances, and any changes to jewelry selection processes would require adjustment and additional training. However, many of them had witnessed the occasional confusion that arose when jewelry choices were made without full consideration of protocol, so they generally welcomed clearer guidelines. International observers within the diplomatic community took particular interest in the developments. Foreign ambassadors and royal protocol experts from other nations watched the kingdom's customs carefully, often using them as benchmarks for their own traditions. The Tiara guidelines were seen as part of the broader challenge facing modern monarchies worldwide: how to maintain traditional dignity while remaining relevant to contemporary audiences. Several foreign royal houses had faced similar dilemmas in recent years, with varying degrees of success. Media reaction began almost immediately, though the initial coverage was largely speculative since official details hadn't been released. Fashion journalists and royal correspondents had long followed the jewelry choices of Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophia with intense interest, analyzing everything from the historical significance of their selections to their estimated monetary values. The prospect of new guidelines provided rich material for speculation about palace dynamics and the evolution of royal traditions. Social media platforms buzzed with amateur royal watchers sharing their opinions about the reported changes. Some users expressed approval for maintaining traditional protocols, viewing the guidelines as necessary preservation of cultural heritage. Others criticized what they perceived as unnecessary restrictions on young royals who had already proven their dedication to their duties. The diversity of opinions reflected the broader public's complex relationship with monarchy, simultaneously wanting tradition and modernity, formality and accessibility. Fashion industry professionals had their own perspective on the developments. Designers who created pieces for royal events understood the significance of jewelry choices in completing their overall aesthetic visions. The new guidelines would require closer collaboration between fashion teams and the keeper of royal jewels, potentially affecting the creative process but also ensuring that historical considerations were integrated from the beginning rather than addressed as an afterthought. Within the broader royal family, reactions varied according to individual personalities and positions within the hierarchy. Senior royals who had navigated decades of protocol requirements generally supported Queen Cordelia's initiative as a natural response to changing circumstances. They had witnessed previous generations adapt to new challenges while maintaining essential traditions, and they viewed the Tiara guidelines as part of this ongoing evolution. Younger members of the extended royal family watched the developments with particular interest, knowing that similar guidelines might eventually affect their own jewelry selections. Those who attended state functions and official events understood that their choices were scrutinized by both media and public, though perhaps not to the same degree as Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophia. The new protocols would likely influence the broader culture of royal jewelry selection throughout the family. The kingdom's treasury department, responsible for ensuring and maintaining the royal jewelry collection, had been quietly advocating for better protocol management for several years. The financial implications of the collection were staggering, with some individual pieces valued in the millions. More frequent and less predictable usage patterns had increased insurance costs and security requirements. The new guidelines promised to restore more manageable patterns of collection usage while maintaining appropriate public access to these cultural treasures. Palace security personnel appreciated the potential benefits of more predictable jewelry selection patterns. Each time a major tiara was worn outside the palace, extensive security measures were required, from transportation protocols to on-site protection during events. Last-minute changes to jewelry selection sometimes necessitated rapid adjustments to security arrangements, creating additional complexity and cost. The new guidelines would help security teams plan more effectively while ensuring appropriate protection for both the jewelry and the royals wearing it. Religious leaders within the kingdom's established church also took note of the developments, particularly regarding the spiritual and symbolic significance of royal regalia. Many of the tiaras had been blessed in religious ceremonies or worn during important liturgical events. The proper stewardship of these items was seen as part of the monarchy's broader role as defender of faith and tradition. Church officials generally supported measures that preserved the sacred aspects of royal ceremonial objects. Academic historians and cultural preservationists viewed the tiara guidelines as a positive development for safeguarding tangible heritage. University researchers who studied royal history and ceremonial traditions had long argued for better documentation and protocol management of the jewelry collection. The new guidelines would facilitate better historical record-keeping while ensuring that the cultural stories embedded in each piece continued to be told appropriately. The reaction from Commonwealth nations varied according to their own relationships with royal traditions and ceremonial protocols. Countries that maintained strong connections to royal ceremonies appreciated the emphasis on preserving traditional protocols, viewing it as part of their shared cultural heritage. Nations with more distant relationships to royal traditions were less concerned with the specifics, but interested in how the monarchy continued to adapt to contemporary challenges. The implementation of Queen Cordelia's tiara guidelines required careful orchestration across multiple palace departments, each contributing their expertise to ensure smooth execution without disrupting the royal family's busy schedule of engagements. Lady Margaret Thornfield found herself at the center of these preparations, working closely with protocol officers to develop practical procedures that would honor the spirit of the new guidelines while maintaining operational efficiency. The first challenge involved creating comprehensive documentation for each tiara in the collection. While Lady Margaret possessed extensive knowledge about the jewelry, much of it existed in her memory or scattered across decades of handwritten records. The new system required detailed digital catalogs that included not only historical information and photographs, but also specific protocols for appropriate usage, maintenance requirements, and insurance considerations. Working late into the evening in the secure vault beneath the palace, Lady Margaret and her small team carefully examined each piece. The diamond rose circlet revealed tiny details she had forgotten over the years. Minute inscriptions hidden beneath gems, slight modifications made for different wearers, and evidence of repairs that told stories of the tiara's journey through various royal generations. This meticulous process was time-consuming but essential for creating the reference materials that would guide future jewelry selections. The photography session required special lighting equipment and security measures that transformed the vault into a temporary studio. Each tiara was captured from multiple angles, showing details that would help Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophia understand the piece's construction and visual impact under different lighting conditions. The photographs would become part of a digital reference system that could be accessed securely from various palace locations, making consultation more convenient without compromising security. Princess Catherine approached the new guidelines with characteristic thoroughness, requesting additional meetings with Lady Margaret to better understand the history and significance of pieces she had worn previously. These educational sessions proved fascinating, revealing stories and traditions she hadn't known despite years of royal duties. The Starlight Tiara, which she had worn to several state dinners, carried connections to diplomatic relationships that gave new meaning to her jewelry choices. During one particularly enlightening session, Lady Margaret showed Princess Catherine detailed sketches and correspondence related to the creation of various tiaras. Letters from 19th-century craftsmen described the challenges of working with specific gems, while palace records documented the occasions for which certain pieces had been commissioned. Understanding these backgrounds helped Princess Catherine appreciate how her modern jewelry choices connected her to centuries of royal tradition and diplomacy. Duchess Sophia's approach to the new guidelines reflected her enthusiasm for learning and her desire to understand her role within royal traditions. She requested a comprehensive overview of the entire collection, wanting to understand not just the pieces she might wear, but the broader context of royal jewelry protocols. Her questions often focused on the symbolic meanings behind different gem choices and design elements, revealing her interest in the cultural significance beyond mere aesthetics. The development of selection protocols required balancing historical appropriateness with practical considerations. Major state occasions clearly demanded the most significant tiaras, while smaller events allowed for more flexibility in jewelry choices. However, the middle ground, semi-formal events, charitable galas, and cultural celebrations required nuanced understanding of context and significance. Lady Margaret worked with protocol officers to create decision trees that would guide appropriate selections while leaving room for personal preference and style. Technology played an important role in modernizing the jewelry management system. A secure digital platform was developed that allowed authorized users to view available pieces, understand their historical contexts, and coordinate selections to avoid conflicts or inappropriate pairings. The system included calendar integration that would alert staff to upcoming events requiring jewelry decisions and provide reminders about maintenance schedules and insurance requirements. The training component of the implementation process extended beyond just Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophia to include their personal staff, who often handled preliminary coordination for royal appearances. These team members needed to understand the new protocols well enough to provide initial guidance and identify when higher-level consultation was required. Regular training sessions were scheduled to ensure everyone remained current with the evolving procedures. One unexpected benefit of the new guidelines was the discovery of several historically significant pieces that had been overlooked in recent years. While cataloging the collection, Lady Margaret's team found tiaras with fascinating histories that had been stored away simply because their styles seemed outdated or their significance had been forgotten. The documentation process revealed opportunities to reintroduce these pieces appropriately, expanding the options available while honoring their unique stories. The coordination with event planners and fashion teams required developing new communication protocols that ensured jewelry selections were integrated into overall appearance planning from the beginning rather than added as an afterthought. This collaborative approach helped prevent conflicts between dress colors and tiara styles, while ensuring that historical considerations were balanced with contemporary fashion requirements. Security implications of the new guidelines were thoroughly reviewed with the palace protection team. The more predictable patterns of jewelry usage allowed security personnel to refine their procedures and reduce some of the reactive measures that had become necessary when selections were made at the last minute. However, the system needed enough flexibility to accommodate genuine emergencies or unexpected changes to the royal schedule. International protocol considerations became particularly important as foreign visits and state occasions required careful attention to diplomatic messaging through jewelry choices. Certain tiaras carried historical connections to specific nations or diplomatic relationships that made them particularly appropriate or inappropriate for various international events. The new guidelines helped ensure that these subtle but significant diplomatic communications were handled properly. The financial aspects of jewelry management also improved under the new system. Insurance companies appreciated the more structured approach to collection usage, which allowed for better risk assessment and potentially reduced premiums. The careful documentation also enhanced the collection's overall value by providing comprehensive provenance information that increased both historical significance and market worth. Training sessions for media relations staff became essential as the new guidelines would inevitably attract public attention and questions. Communications team members needed to understand enough about the protocols to provide accurate information to journalists while avoiding unnecessarily detailed discussions that might compromise security or privacy. The messaging focused on tradition preservation and historical stewardship rather than restriction or control. The first major test of Queen Cordelia's new tiara guidelines came sooner than expected, when the kingdom received an invitation to host a state visit from the president of Valeria, a small but diplomatically important nation known for its cultural heritage and strategic location. The event would require multiple formal occasions over 3 days, providing the perfect opportunity to demonstrate how the new protocols could enhance rather than complicate royal ceremonial duties. Princess Catherine embraced the challenge with enthusiasm, working closely with Lady Margaret Thornfield to select appropriate jewelry for each occasion. The state welcome ceremony called for one of the most significant tiaras, and together they chose the Imperial Star Tiara, whose sapphires complemented both the formal nature of the event and the blue featured in Valeria's national colors. This selection demonstrated the subtle diplomatic messaging that proper jewelry choices could convey, showing respect for the visiting nation while maintaining royal dignity. The documentation process proved invaluable during the planning stage. Rather than relying solely on memory and intuition, the selection team could review detailed records of when the imperial star tiara had been worn previously, ensuring that its reappearance would be appropriately spaced and contextually meaningful. The historical records revealed that it had last been worn during a similarly significant state visit 5 years earlier, making its selection both historically appropriate and diplomatically significant. Duchess Sophia's role in the state visit involved hosting a cultural exhibition and charitable fundraising gala, events that required elegant but less formal jewelry choices. Working within the new guidelines, she selected the Rose Garden Tiara, a piece from the 1920s that struck the perfect balance between sophistication and accessibility. The choice demonstrated how the protocols could guide selections that honored tradition while allowing personal style to shine through. The media coverage of the state visit provided an unexpected validation of Queen Cordelia's approach to the jewelry guidelines. Fashion journalists and royal correspondents noted the thoughtful coordination between the jewelry selections and the various ceremonial requirements. Rather than appearing restricted by protocol, both Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophia seemed to have gained confidence and authority through their more informed choices. International observers at the state visit also appreciated the attention to ceremonial detail that the new guidelines facilitated. Diplomatic protocol experts from other nations noted how the jewelry selections contributed to the overall success of the ceremonial occasions, enhancing the dignified atmosphere that made substantive discussions more productive. The Valerian delegation specifically commented on the respectful attention to detail that characterized all aspects of their welcome. Behind the scenes, the palace staff found that the new protocols actually simplified their work rather than complicating it. Clear guidelines reduced the uncertainty and last-minute confusion that had sometimes characterized jewelry selection in the past. Personal assistants, dressers, and security personnel could plan more effectively when they understood the framework within which selections would be made. The success of the state visit prompted broader reflection on how the tiara guidelines might be extended to other aspects of royal protocol. Queen Cordelia began considering whether similar systematic approaches could benefit other areas where tradition and modernity needed to be balanced carefully. The jewelry protocols had demonstrated that thoughtful structure could enhance rather than restrict the effectiveness of royal ceremonial duties. Princess Catherine found that her deeper understanding of the jewelry collection had enriched her overall approach to royal duties. Knowing the history and significance of the pieces she wore gave her additional confidence during public appearances and provided interesting talking points during conversations with guests and dignitaries. The educational aspect of the new guidelines had transformed jewelry selection from a sometimes stressful decision into an opportunity for cultural connection. Duchess Sophia discovered that the protocols helped her develop her own signature style within royal traditions. Rather than feeling constrained by rules, she found that understanding the historical context of different pieces helped her make choices that reflected both her personality and her respect for royal customs. The guidelines provided a framework within which creativity and personal expression could flourish appropriately. The broader royal family began to see the benefits of the tiara guidelines extending beyond just jewelry selection. The systematic approach to preserving and sharing historical knowledge had applications for other aspects of royal tradition, from ceremonial procedures to charitable protocols. Several family members requested similar educational sessions about other aspects of royal heritage that they felt they didn't fully understand. Public reaction to the visible results of the new guidelines was overwhelmingly positive. Royal watchers and fashion enthusiasts noticed the increased sophistication and appropriateness of jewelry choices at recent events. Rather than seeing restriction, they observed enhanced elegance and cultural awareness that made royal appearances more meaningful and engaging. The palace's relationship with museums and cultural institutions was strengthened by the comprehensive documentation process required for the guidelines. Detailed records of the jewelry collection's history and significance became valuable resources for historians and researchers studying royal traditions and ceremonial practices. Several academic institutions requested access to the historical information for scholarly projects that would further preserve and share this cultural heritage. Lady Margaret Thornfield found renewed purpose in her role as keeper of the royal jewels. The implementation of the guidelines had required her to organize and articulate knowledge she had accumulated over decades, creating legacy documentation that would benefit future generations. Her expertise had been systemized in ways that ensured continuity even when personnel changes occurred within the palace. The diplomatic benefits of the new guidelines extended beyond individual events to the kingdom's broader international relationships. Foreign royal houses and diplomatic missions began noting the increased attention to ceremonial detail that characterized the kingdom's official functions. This reputation for cultural sophistication and protocol awareness enhanced the nation's soft power and international influence. As the first year under the new guidelines drew to a close, Queen Cordelia reflected on the success of her initiative. The Tiara protocols had achieved their intended purpose of preserving historical traditions while enabling modern royals to fulfill their duties with confidence and cultural awareness. The balance between respect for the past and adaptation to contemporary requirements had been successfully maintained. The long-term implications of the guidelines extended beyond the immediate royal family to influence how the monarchy would evolve in future generations. By establishing clear protocols for cultural preservation while maintaining flexibility for personal expression, Queen Cordelia had created a framework that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential continuity. The story of the Tiara Guidelines became a model for other royal houses facing similar challenges in balancing tradition with modernity. International conferences on royal protocol began featuring presentations about the kingdom's approach, sharing lessons learned and best practices developed during the implementation process. The success demonstrated that thoughtful change management could strengthen rather than weaken traditional institutions. Looking toward the future, the Tiara Guidelines represented more than just jewelry protocols. They symbolized a broader approach to cultural stewardship that honored the past while embracing the responsibilities of the present. Queen Cordelia's initiative had shown that tradition and progress could work together to create stronger, more meaningful institutions that served both their members and the broader community they represented.